Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I see we have lots of participants today from different parts of the globe. Welcome to the first virtual discussion on ESG in Africa by NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business and Risk Insights. I can see lots of people are still registering. We focus today on South Africa. It is an absolute honor today as an NYU Stern grad to co-host this critically important event in South Africa. At this moment, it's my pleasure to introduce now Professor Tansy Whelan to make opening keynote remarks. Tansy is a clinical professor for business and society, founder and director of NYU Stern School of Business Center for Sustainable Business. Professor Whelan has over 25 years of experience in the field of ESG. Professor Whelan, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Andre, and it is such a pleasure to be working with our wonderful Stern alum. And also I want to say congratulations on the terrific work that you've done at Risk Insights. I know Environmental Finance awarded you for the best ESG data provider in Africa, which is a real testament to the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for helping or leading the organization of this panel. I'm really looking forward to learning from the terrific panelists that we have today, and I know you'll be introducing them later. So just a few thoughts. As you mentioned, I run the Center for Sustainable Business at NYU Stern. Our focus is on helping business leaders really embed sustainability core to business strategy to drive better societal performance, but also better environmental, social, and governance performance, and better financial performance. And we see that those things are aligned, really. Today, we see globally about $35 trillion invested under the rubric of environmental, social, and governance. And that number has been growing exponentially every couple of years. Unfortunately, currently, and you know this well, as does our panelists, we don't have a good insight into how much ESG investing there is in Africa and in South Africa. But that, I think, is a great opportunity to really build out ESG in the region. And why is that important? Well, for a number of different reasons. And again, our panelists and you will speak to this very eloquently, but we have a number of societal issues to deal with, like climate change, inequity, a series of problems. And business is a key partner in that, whether it's on the investor side or on the corporate side. What we see and what we're learning is that when companies embed sustainability core to their business strategy and solve for these problems, they actually also drive better financial performance. We put together we did an academic sort of meta-analysis of more than 1,000 academic studies published between 2015 and 2020. Those studies found that 58% of them had a positive correlation between corporate financial performance and corporate sustainability. On the investor side, 33% of those studies found that investors, when employing ESG strategies, outperformed conventional investing. And 26% found that they performed at par with conventional investing. So what we're seeing is a really strong business case for ESG investments. Those are all correlation studies, though. So we've been looking at causality. We have developed a program or methodology called Return on Sustainability Investment, where we try to understand what is actually driving that better performance. And we've identified 9 mediating factors that include, like in your name, risk, so mitigating risk, also operational efficiency. So typically corporates think of pollution as a compliance issue, but actually it's the ultimate in an operational inefficiency. You're buying more than you need to pay to dispose of what's left over, as an example, right? Innovation, huge area of growth, driving better performance by companies when you're investing in sustainable processes, products, and services. And employee engagement, retention, supplier resiliency, a whole series of positive benefits that can be driven by really embedding sustainability in your core business strategy and embracing it as an investor. So really looking forward to hearing from our panelists about the state of ESG investing, its impacts, what you're learning about it, and how we might learn here, we might help here at NYU Stern. So thanks so much for your attention, and turning it back over to you, Andre.
Professor Whelan, thank you very much for these insightful opening remarks. To our honorable guests joining us from different parts of the world and time zones, thank you for your support. Risk Insights is the first female-owned data science company on the continent that developed an ESG rating tool using machine learning and AI to rate 100% of the listed companies on several African stock exchanges. Risk Insights has rated all listed companies on stock exchanges, small, mid, and large caps, taking into account all public, voluntary, and mandatory disclosure, news feeds together with the correlation to financial variables. I'm very proud to be CEO of Risk Insights, a company that has collected over 350 data points on ESG data for a number of years for over 600 companies in Africa. Risk Insights efforts are recognized by a number of the international awards, such as Best ESG Data Provider, Africa from Environmental Finance, the Most Innovative ESG Rating Solution on Continent from the European, and 2 awards from the World Economic Forum for our AI-powered ESG GPS rating tool. We'll be talking about Africa with focus on South Africa today, country which has been recognized for so many important achievements if we look back in human history. First, and probably the most important one, Africa is a home of humanity itself. As we know, cradle of humankind is here in South Africa. Home of the first domesticated basic grains, it's also Africa. Home of the first known domesticated cattle, back here to Africa. Closer today, it's home of the first integrated corporate report, also done in South Africa. And it's also home of the richest ever man known to civilization. It's in Africa, a little bit up on the map from South Africa. And last not least, it's a home for the first AI-powered ESG rating tool for Africa by Africans called ESG GPS. I'm very passionate about ESG, and I look forward to interesting discussion with our esteemed panel, who will share their thought leadership on ESG in Africa with focus on the Sub-Sahara and South Africa. Data tells a story. And so far, Africa is still immature in its disclosure on ESG, which also is a fluid subject matter on its own. Better world through better business. This is exactly what world needs today. We are very pleased that NYU with the Professor Whelan agreed to join forces in this very important discussion. In 2020, Professor Whelan, with a group of the researchers and Rockefeller Asset Management, conducted research through meta-studies to examine the relationship between ESG and financial performance with 10 years of data. The hypothesis has been proven of a positive relationship between ESG and financial performance. Risk Insights founder also found a positive correlation reflected in the ESG GPS model. That listed companies which disclose better in terms of the ESG outperformed their peers and certain indices. For us, focus on non-financial data is key. As we all know, in any complex task, such as ESG global transition, for instance, a team effort is only as good as performance of the weakest link. Africa, as we know today, is not the strongest link. On our green continent, we face major issues on many fronts: social, environmental, and in many countries, governance. It's very important to bring specific issues that Africa faces in focus and identify a solution as part of what is known as just transition. As we all know, at the time of the fourth industrial revolution, transition to sustainable economy is not a question of if anymore, rather a question of when and how. Africa is home for over 1 billion people, major resource powerhouse for global economy. Our energy mix in Africa is not ideal, yet we are only responsible for the fraction of the global CO2 emissions. Africa, with its very young population, is a awakening giant. The African Development Bank Group defines the just transition concept as a framework for facilitating equitable access to the benefits and sharing of the cost of sustainable development, such that livelihoods of all people, including the most vulnerable, are supported and enhanced as societies make the transition to low carbon and resilient economies. A just transition affirms Africa's right to development and industrialization, based on the Paris Agreement negotiated language of equity and principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. There are a lot of issues and there are a lot of opportunities. One of the challenges for today's panel was brought to us earlier today by South African electricity monopoly, Eskom. They announced that they may switch off electricity as we speak. We, of course, have alternative supply in the office, so please do not leave this event if we have short 1-2 minutes interruption. Without any further delay, as we have fantastic panel, ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce distinguished guest of today's panel. Alana Makobela, Divisional Executive Financial Sector Conduct Authority, South Africa. Alana has been with National Treasury of South Africa since 2000. And since that time, he was key person in a number of the large projects, including representing the National Treasury at the G20 Financial Access Working Group, as well as the Financial Sector Chapter. Lulu Kruhel, Chief Economist of PwC South Africa, a partner at PwC Strategy Business, and ESG lead for PwC Africa. Lulu regularly presents to industry leaders, business associations, government bodies, and to media on the South African economy and ESG. Eva Lim heads the data management and reporting platform at the fintech company OTC Fin from the United States. Among other services, OTC Fin is assisting its clients to integrate ESG data of their underlying investments to enable integrated analysis of non-financial factors alongside financial performance and risk metrics during the investment and risk management process. Isha Mansingh. Isha is the Executive Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Investor Relations at Imperial Logistics, which is now a subsidiary of the DP World. And she is responsible for ESG, investor relations, stakeholder communications, brand, marketing, and sponsorships. Isha champions and drives Imperial's first ESG strategy with her team, and under her leadership, Imperial has been recognized as a leader in sustainability reporting in the transport and logistics sector. Isha also a young global leader, 2022 by the World Economic Forum. She serves as a non-executive in a number of boards. She was also recognized as the most influential woman in Africa 2022 by the European Business Magazine, and being among 100 most successful women in business in the world 2022 by Global Trade Chamber, among many other awards. Let me go straight to the discussion. And let me ask first question, Alana. Alana, regulatory environment in South Africa has been so far slow to respond to ESG as priority for the country due to multiple challenges. And that slow, I'm obviously pronouncing from my perspective as the head of the ESG rating company. You may agree or disagree with this. Due to multiple challenges that we face as a country, considering energy crisis, unemployment rates, and delistings. Where do you see South Africa from ESG disclosure and compliance perspectives in the near future? And how far the authorities are looking when they are talking about the ESG and ESG transition? Alana?
Thank you, Andre, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So yes, I am going to disagree with you, Andre. But first, let me make full disclosures. I happen to be quite a strong environmentalist, so don't be surprised when I sound biased towards ESG issues and factoring. I would have loved to say that I'm also a socialist, but you know that can come with several interpretations, so we shall leave that one out for now. So, Andre, as I was saying, it is not particularly accurate that South Africa has been slow in this space, right? We have a very long history, which you actually touched upon, in terms of, you know, discrimination in the country. We have gone through, lived through apartheid years. We have had our own fair share of corporate failures. Steinhoff is one in particular. And we are going through some climate issues. I mean, it's spring, or it's supposed to be spring in South Africa now, but it feels like summer, right? With the degrees literally sitting at 33. degrees Celsius. So we have a history, and I suppose that has lent itself to South Africa being one of the champions when it comes to ESG, right? So as early as 1994, we already had the King Code, which deals with governance issues and how corporates should constitute themselves. And so that was a milestone in itself. We were one of the first founding signatories to the UN PRI, right, through the Government Employees Pension Fund in 2006. So the dates are quite important here, Andre. And we've since done quite a lot of work when it comes to retirement funds through our regulation 28, right? So in 2013, we had introduced for the first time a principle on ESG, which said, if you are in a retirement fund, you must ensure that any asset you are going to invest into, you are going to screen it using ESG factors. And we were quite one of the early movers then. And we have since followed that up with a guidance where we required, and nudged retirement funds to indicate in their investment policy statements how they approach ESG. This was, as early as 2019. And part of the guidance also talked about, the need to disclose ESG approach and also reporting. And very soon we will be issuing some reporting requirements based on the IFRS disclosure standards. So that will assist very much in terms of guiding retirement funds, how they should start reporting this. So we're not paying lip service to this stuff. We really, making concerted effort to really give effect to this. And of course, you would have seen some of the good work coming from the JSE. So in 2022, this year, they released a very good disclosure document, and it deals with double materiality. And so we think we've been making good strides in this area, Andre. Yes, there are economic challenges. We have high unemployment rate. And part of it, relates to Eskom, as you correctly touched on. So Eskom is a monopoly. And interesting enough, when we even look at the JSE, probably, the top 13 to 20 shares on the JSE are dependent on Eskom, right? So if Eskom goes, it literally takes the economy with it, right? And then that has impact on retirement funds. That will have impact on us who are likely to work and save for retirement. And so one of the issues is, how best do you enable this transitioning to a safer environment? And the reality is that you do need to factor in transitional cost. And I know we will talk about this a little bit later, but it is important to factor in transitional cost. It is important to realize that there are economies in Africa who are still very much reliant on fossil fuel, right? So how do you get those economies, for example, in West Africa, to make that transitioning safe and sound? So let me stop there. And Andre, I hope I've convinced you that we have actually done a lot in this area. Thank you.
Alana, you definitely convinced me, and apologizing, it was a bit provocative question. You definitely convinced me that the principles of the good governance are there. The moment you said I need to disclose upfront. Thank you very much for that. That was really appreciated. But we'll have a discussion about where we see just transition towards the second part of the conversation. Thank you for that. Just a little reminder for everyone, if you have any questions you would like to ask anyone, you can send your email at info@riskandsize.co.za. Today we have over 90 people participating, so unfortunately we will not allow the mic in the room, just to keep it to keep the discussion going. Lulu, let me put you on the spot, and I would like to ask you the question. As the chief economist of PwC and the head of sustainability for the continent, do you believe that ESG will play a role in econometrics modeling? and have impact on sovereign risk profile of the countries? And if so, how? And what do you think about the whole equation with the ESG performance of the corporate sector companies versus the driving of the policy-making decisions?
Yeah.
Hugo?
Thanks, Andre, and good day to everybody on the call. It's lovely to be with you. Yeah, I think Alana has started, explaining the touch points of ESG and ESG decision making with the South African economy, with the African continent, but definitely for South Africa already. It's always interesting when we speak to our counterparts in other parts of the world. And I'm not trying to say there that they're doing anything wrong, but in the developed world, the focus is a lot on the environmental aspects and, how we should manage that and so on. And my perception is that definitely in the South African context, it's just as important if we look at the role that the environmental impacts play. But we have the added complexity of really understanding the social implications of what we're doing. So if we're making environmental policy or decisions, what does it mean from a social perspective? If we don't, what does it mean? If we as companies decide to take a particular route, so if government makes policy decisions, it has an impact. If a company decides to take a particular route or not to do it, it has an implication. We've already spoken about the energy crisis that we're sitting with and how we going to resolve that over the next couple of years is going to play a fundamental role in how our economy is able to grow and how also, I want to almost say more importantly, how people inside the economy, living in this economy, how their own situation will improve. Because we sit with very high levels of unemployment, very high levels of inequality, I think, unfortunately, the highest in the world. So making economic decisions and understanding the implications of the economic decisions that we make from an ESG perspective is fundamentally important. And we've seen that if you look at government as well, the central bank, the FSCA, the way that the regulatory organizations or regulators in the economy is thinking about how we should approach certain of these challenges. They're asking the questions already of businesses to say, you need to explain to us what the impact of this will be, what the risk of this will be on your business. So for me, if we look at it, there's two important parts to it. The one is for the business to understand its own position and also to understand the potential policy implications. And in both of those, having information, being able to provide some scenarios and views, and we all know models are fallible. All of us around the table here today, I'm pretty sure knows that. But it gives us a potential view of where things might be going. So where we've engaged with clients and with companies, that is one of the things that they're trying to understand, and trying to understand what are the environmental risks that they need to deal with. What does their own responses mean? How is all of that tied to what might happen in industry and policy? It's very tricky to actually try and use models or modeling scenarios, etc., to actually do that. But I think we're making very, very good headway, as on the continent and in the country as well. I'm blown away very often if we again speak to some of our counterparts in terms of where our thinking is. Not to be arrogant. It's not us, but when we speak to our counterparts, for example, we spoke to our counterparts in Germany a few weeks earlier, and they said, well, slow down, we haven't thought about that. And it's not stuff that we as PwC thought about, it's stuff that we as South Africa thought about. So I think it's fundamental. I think we're really trying to think through it. It's part of what we do. The regulators are asking the questions of businesses, but also providing really, really good guidance in terms of how we can approach that. So, and we touched on the just transition. We will speak about that later. I think that is a fundamental aspect related to the South African economy. Just to get to the very last bit of what you asked, will it have an impact on sovereign ratings? It could very well. I know that there's, when the rating agencies actually approach the sovereign ratings, there's a whole range of things that they think through, and policy responses and how it could lead to risks or address risks is a key part of that. And as a result, if we do not, if we potentially make the wrong decisions, or we don't make decisions around how we're going to resolve our energy issues, for example, that would definitely have an implication of where our sovereign ratings would go in future. And it's been something that's been quite a talking point in South Africa. We've been downgraded. We were at investment grade before. We're now not at investment grade. But I must confess, I suppose it's been a little bit less of an issue than we all thought it would be. I'm not going to say that it's not an issue, but I think we all thought that the world would end, and it didn't. We managed to continue.
Well, thank you very much for your insights. And if you allow me, I'll take it to the corporate level, and I will ask Isha, who is representing one of the largest logistic company in the world, and definitely one of the largest imperial, as it was known in South Africa, about how have you integrated sustainability reporting within your company and C-suite, considering challenge to balance risk, return, and resources, which are always limited from the company perspective, and how did you achieve, where Imperial now, in terms of the well-recognized in South Africa and beyond South African borders as the very well company doing quite well on the sustainability reporting and on the sustainability performance. Isha?
Thanks, Andre, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. And firstly, congrats to Risk Insights for being one of our champions and pioneers of ESG on the continent, and for bringing us all together. So, Andre, reporting is an output, and there goes my light, as you can tell. Reporting is an output of practices within the business, right? And I think I actually want to start there. So for a business like Imperial, we actually made the conscious decision a few years ago to not just focus on ESG reporting due to pressure from particularly the investment community, but to consciously integrate ESG into our daily business practices. And, you have to start with the fundamental mindset shift in the business that moves away from thinking of ESG in silos, either focusing too much on environmental or CSI, or looking at it just to tick a box. And I think many businesses in the past just, did ESG in whatever shape or form to maintain their social license to operate. And it's become a lot more than that, as we've heard. And I think the first step for us making that conscious shift in the business was to actually integrate ESG and make it an integral part of our business strategy. And, so just as much as we are focusing on our financial indicators and making money and making profit, ESG was set aside with a very focused strategy that we all co-created across the business. And again, it wasn't a dictation from the board or the leadership to say we should do this and we should achieve this. All leaders that worked for Imperial aligned on a strategy for ESG and what our outputs should be to ensure that we create, and more importantly, sustain value for all our stakeholders across the value chain. And I think that's where ESG, if done correctly, can actually be, not just an accolade for good reporting, but it actually becomes a competitive advantage for business. And, as I said earlier, many corporates, particularly in the listed space in the past, was put under pressure to make sure that to be investable, we tick many boxes that investors wanted us to tick on the sustainability front. But what we've started to see as a corporate, that in the last few years, the narrative has changed. Your other stakeholder groups are coming to the party and are actually saying that for us to achieve our objectives in the just transition, for example, you, Imperial, as part of our value chain, has to also play your part. So we will no longer renew business with you or give you new business if you cannot prove to us what your ESG strategy is, and more importantly, what are the targets you're setting. So, it's all great to go out and tell an ESG PR story, but if you don't have a focused strategy, if you don't have these business practices, and if you can't measure it, and be able to show progress to all your stakeholders, you will no longer be relevant. So the fact that ESGs are nice to have, or it's just an output of reporting, those days are long past. For you to remain relevant and for you to remain competitive in any industry or in any market, ESGs are non-negotiable. And the other thing I would add is that ESG is everyone's responsibility in the business. And this is why we need to have fundamental culture shifts in the business to encourage our people, from leadership down to factory floor, to basically say that the little you can do to contribute to ESG will actually be for the benefit of our business. So the way we see ESG in our business is that it's a non-negotiable. It's about integration into strategy. It's about partnerships with our stakeholders. And most importantly, it's everyone's responsibility.
Isha, thank you very much. I love how you said it's responsibility of every individual. I'm sure that will be shared by many participating in today's event as well as outside, because that's the only way how you can change the world is to take all people with you, because it's coming also with a very big responsibility from the corporate side to educate people, to explain to the people, and not just let them run the show, basically how they understand it. It's very, very important. But without this very, very hard work, you cannot achieve obviously those results which Imperial, for example, achieved so far. That's very insightful. Thank you very much for sharing that. Eva, I would like to ask the question now more related, obviously, to asset management industry. In your work with asset managers across the globe, in the US and across the globe, have you seen an increased interest in ESG considerations during the investment allocation and risk management process? And how have asset managers sought to integrate ESG factors in response to investor demands? And obviously in the question, I'm assuming they do, but please feel free to disagree. Thank you. Eva?
You can hear me now, sorry. Good day to everyone. Thanks for having me on, Andre. It's nice to participate in this event. So yeah, for your question, actually, I think Professor Tansy Whelan alluded to that in her introduction, where you can see that the writings on the wall. It's an ongoing trend. There's been exponential growth. I believe there was a research that showed in 2020 was a breakthrough year with record investments in ESG related allocations and in ESG products being launched, and it has just continued to grow from being a niche from decades ago to now mainstream, and it seems to be here to stay. As I think all the panelists are agreeing, it really is a key factor to be considered. The studies are showing there are correlations with performance, with risk, and in general, the earth needs it. So I think this is where we're at. So in terms of, I think we've all already kind of, maybe to summarize the drivers, there's mainly all of these awareness that's grown in terms of the climate, social issues, and the urgency and the priority placed on them. So then you have investors coming on board to align their investments with their values. Regulators, governments, they're all policy changes and making it a forefront and a priority for sustainable investments. And even within the investment companies themselves, the stakeholders are recognizing that, yes, we have to align our practice with our values, and also to potentially chase alpha, manage risk, and or all of these combination of things that are really just driving the interest and the importance of integrating ESG within their investment and risk management decisions. There are various levels in terms of how they are actually integrating it. I mean, I think I saw a recent study that as of 2021 or something, they might still be around a quarter of the industry that are still ESG unaware. But for the rest of the 75, I guess you can say there are different levels. So you have a simplistic negative or exclusionary screening, which I guess is one of the very basic entries into an ESG integrated form. Then the most common, I think, is the integration of ESG factors within your fundamental analysis. I guess within this, there's the best-in-class selection where you're looking at your companies and measuring them against their peers, picking out the best ones in terms of ESG performance. And then all the way, I guess, to the other end of the spectrum, I'm probably skipping a lot of variations in between, but then you have impact investing, where the primary objective is to achieve environmental, social, ESG goals, with financial return being potentially a secondary consideration. So there are different levels. I have to add that in terms of, the practically applying it in their business, there are also, dependencies on the investment firms themselves in terms of their size, the actual investments that the asset classes they're investing in, whether it's public companies, equities or fixed income, to privates, to real estate, infrastructure, whatnot. The various asset classes also play a role in how they are integrating ESG, because obviously the materiality could be different, looking at different asset classes, different sectors. So all of these factors play a role in how they are integrating it, the data availability of the instruments or the underlying investments they're looking at. Also, there is a shift in the skill sets because usually traditionally it's sufficient to have your knowledge in your finance, being financially educated and whatnot, but this is no longer a case. I mean, I think companies that were very early adopters, they would have very specialized ESG teams working alongside their financial analysts, or a combination of both skills in one person, or partnering up together. That's probably something common. But again, this goes back down to budget considerations and what the company's about in terms of incorporating those skill sets into their strategy. So that I think I've seen as a challenge that investment managers are addressing, how to bring these two together practically in an everyday analysis. So I think that's all I have to say on this point for now.
Eva, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you very much for your insights. I was looking actually at the I'm a member of the couple of associations, financial professionals in states, and was very interesting. A couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, they ran the little survey about the awareness of the boards of the directors of U.S. companies on the ESG. And to my surprise, the awareness was actually on a quite low level in terms of how important ESG, and it was definitely not rated in the top 3. It was somewhere in the top 10, and it's still quite low. And just a couple of days ago, preparing for this session, I happened to see the report. I believe it was a PwC report, which was run globally on the directors, independent directors, and their awareness and how important they are treating the ESG. And again, to my surprise, it was not on the top 3 and not even on the top 5 on more than 50% of the directors when that report was run. So yeah, awareness is still unfortunately an issue, and I'm sure the companies would be run as good as their boards would be basically setting the strategy and the tone from the top. So it's obviously important. And Eva, if I may subsequently ask another question, which is taking it to slightly different perspectives, which is ESG data, because there are several ESG data providers globally. Obviously, there are a number of them. And how do you see the importance of the ESG of the data in ESG transition globally, to obviously the companies you're dealing with, as well as in the countries as South Africa, which is developing markets?
Yes, so obviously the data is crucial to the investment decision-making process. I think we are, as you may be familiar, we're helping the investment managers to integrate ESG data within their usual dashboarding and analysis, where they, typically, maybe not so much anymore, but you would just be focusing on financial risk metrics, fundamentals, that sort of data. But now we're trying to bring in the ESG spectrum to have an overall, as we said, an ESG integrated viewpoint in the investment decision making. So obviously the data is crucial. And to that, as you said, the third-party data providers are playing a big role in terms of consolidating, aggregating the data, which is coming from company reports, regulatory filings, news, media, and whatnot, and then ultimately, layering on their methodology to rate and score these companies from an ESG perspective. So that is an important role to be played. I have to, and investment managers do rely a lot on these, third party, the role that these data providers play. I do have to say that there is still work to be done in that area in terms of the normalization. I think we can all agree. It's not an easy topic. It's complex, and there is a lot of data points, a lot of definitions, a lot of ways to measure the metrics. And also on the rating side, there is, there's differences in methodologies between the various rating agencies. So I think there are also studies being showing that there can be low correlation between ratings, between different rating agencies too, coming from, even the way they assess materiality, for example. So there is still that aspect to be had in terms of when you're looking at, how do I source my data? How do I make a right decision as to the appropriate data source for the underlying investments that I'm looking at? And how do I agree with that? Again, that also goes hand in hand with the proper skill set to make the judgment. So sometimes, companies might have to get consultants to help out before they build up that knowledge in-house. So that's one element of that. But on South Africa, by the way, so we did do a recent exercise on the top JSE, the top 40, and integrating their ESG data with the financial data. So actually, it does seem like there has been pretty good coverage in terms of the key ESG metrics coming from these top 40, which I think was, I think we were discussing this, quite a encouraging sign. So you have, the CO2 emissions, water consumption, gender diversity, the BBBE ratings. All of these seem to be, pretty well reported. I think in the high 90s, if not 100% across the sector for the top 40s. So that was pretty encouraging. So hopefully, and I think as you alluded, there seems to be a correlation as well with, the performance in the long term, financial performance, and with these ratings. So hopefully, with these companies being a benchmark, it will serve as an example or a driver for other companies to follow suit and, I guess lift, have the tide lift and, raise all the boats in the industry to report more transparently. But yes, I think I would like to echo Esha's point that the data is the data is theoretically as good as what the company is. I mean, there is a problem of greenwashing too, but hopefully we do want to avoid greenwashing and really, as you said, actively implement the principles that we are reporting on and be sincerely reporting on that. So it's a true and accurate reflection of what the company is doing. That would actually be the true, I think, end goal of, it's not data for data. It's data for, having a better outcome on these factors that we're reporting on.
Yeah, Eva, thank you very much for your perspective, and I like that you touch base on the greenwashing issues as well as it's very important, obviously, that companies actually reporting how they're performing, not creating. But it's also important, of course, to have a very clear rules in terms of the what to report, what not to report, what's important, not. And we all know that it's quite a fluid subject matter on its own. So that's a little tricky. And if I may ask to Lulu to bring your perspective on the same subject, which is the data, Africa data, or its limitations in terms of the data available in the market, and what role you think the data would be playing in the just transition in Africa and South Africa, of course, from your perspectives. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Andre, Africa, and it's true to a certain extent, there's always been this perception that data is not easily available, that there's lags in terms of information being available. If I just think about South Africa, you know, and certain of the economic data, being an economist that we need to deal with, there's a lag very often in terms of when that becomes available versus some of the developed markets. And as a result, it has an impact on the ability to make decisions and how quickly we can make decisions and what the implications are. Very often we, you know, when we see numbers being published about economic activity, we're talking 6 months ago or at least 3 or 4 months ago. And then everybody gets excited and then we kind of, as economists, often feel that, you know, that ship has sailed, so let's move on. But the bottom line is having information and having a view of how things might change, even if it's not perfect, if like I said earlier, and what the implications of the decisions are, is a way to understand which policy directions we should take. It's a way for companies to understand, you know, what strategies they need to implement, or, you know, how they could potentially react. The just transition, you know, the whole move for South Africa away from a carbon-intensive energy sector into cleaner energy and technology. There's lots of debates going on, and I think data is not the be-all and end-all, but it's an extremely important indicator that can show us who the potential winners and losers are if we make certain decisions. And that is really the role that I personally think that it should and could play, is helping us understand if we don't do something, or if we do something, who would be the winners and who would be the losers, and then making strategic and policy decisions on that basis to say that, you know, how are we going to counter it? If we think about the just transition, depending who you talk to, they will have different views. You know, there's people that will tell you, oh, but if we close all the coal-fired power stations, then we have to close all the coal mines. There are certain towns that will and provinces in South Africa that will be completely obliterated. On the flip side, if we don't do that, you know, what does it mean for our export market and the industries that's linked to that? Because, you know, the markets to which we are exporting are already asking that questions. What does it mean for the most vulnerable parts of the population if we have severe climate events and weather events that we need to deal with? So having insight and having that data is a crucial part of that conversation. And I think we've come a long way. We've made massive strides, and I think business in particular has done a lot to make information available. My request would just be to government to say, okay, you need to meet us halfway in terms of the statistical agencies, etc. And you know that business has a lot of this information, but to make certain of the decisions, we also need you to step in. So it's about meeting each other halfway.
Well, look, thank you very much. Thank you for these insights. If I may pass it to Isha, and what I want to ask is slightly different angle. The question is coming from being a listed company a couple of years ago and now part of the listed large group. How will Imperial, as a part of the DP world, will drive ESG transparency and impact in South Africa and Africa? And I'm sorry, I just need to be conscious in terms of the time. We have about 10 minutes to go, so Isha, if it's we can do it. And Alano, I have one more question in about 3-4 minutes, please. Thank you.
No problem, Andre, and thanks. Look, I think that ESG and transparent reporting is necessary or non-negotiable, irrespective of whether or not you're a listed company. And I think, you know, being a listed company does take you through a very stringent set of good governance from a reporting requirements perspective, because you're required to adhere to many standards and many protocols, etc. But once a company gets into that cadence, you know, irrespective of who your owner is, it's in your best interest to continue with those governance and reporting processes and practices. Because as I said earlier, you know, various of your stakeholders use your publicly available information to make business-related decisions on whether to partner with you or not to partner with you outside of just the investor universe. So certainly as Imperial, you know, we've undertaken, and I'm not sure why the lights go out every time I choose to speak, but it's a sign. But I think as Imperial, you know, being part of a bigger DP World group now, I think the pressure will be even more, be heightened really, because you know, I think being a big part of DP World, and especially operating in Africa, as we've discussed earlier, where there's heightened scrutiny, you're a new business, you're the new kid on the block, everyone is looking for, you know, the scrutiny is there, and everyone's looking for the transparency of data. And so we will certainly be continuing with our practices to meet our stakeholder needs. But at the same time, and I'm sure a lot of people on the screen that are joining the session feels the pressure because, you know, as ESG has come to the fore, equally the ESG guidance and frameworks that have come to the fore have been numerous, right? I mean, some of them help us in aligning reporting, but where does it all end from a company perspective, right? We've got TCFD, we've got the regulatory requirements, we've got ISSB, and many others. And various of our stakeholders use different ratings that we spoke about earlier to measure us to our peers. So I do think that, you know, we need to be cognizant also not to get reporting fatigue, because when you are the corporate that's reporting to your stakeholders, one, it's time consuming, two, it's, you know, you can't be everything to everyone. And my only advice to companies is to again, use the principle of materiality to determine how you can best tell your value creation story and how you can best position yourself from an ESG perspective to tick the right boxes. But it's a non-negotiable, and we'll be continuing with our practices as if we were a listed company.
Isha, thank you very much for these insights. Alana, let me ask the last question for the panel and give you 3 minutes, please. I know it's not easy because question would be very difficult and it's coming from the comments which Isha just made, yeah? What would be your estimate of cost and anticipated benefits for corporate South Africa for such ESG compliance? And compliance, obviously, I'm talking about compliance not in terms of the reporting only, but also going deeper in terms of the performance. So how do you see it from the regulator perspective?
Yes, thanks, Andrew. So it is quite a hard question, and I'll confess we haven't really crunched the numbers on this. So you know, it's something that we probably need to think through. And part of it is that, remember, Andre, it's not the financial institutions who are the polluters per se here, right? Unless, of course, if you are mining Bitcoins, then that's another story in itself. So it's more the mining houses here. It's more the coal, people who are using coal. It's more us who use plastics when we go to supermarkets, right? We are, you know, the polluters. So the question has always been, you know, as a regulator, as a financial regulator, what exactly should you be regulating for? And it's not an easy question to answer. And yes, Isha is right, because part of it is to manage the reporting fatigue. And that's the reason why we have been careful not to be prescriptive at this early stage, because again, Isha is right. There are so many moving parts here. You really want to take stock. I mean, even at the global level, a recent survey issued by the UN indicates that there's still room for some convergence at the global level. And so you want to wait for that convergence to happen, and then maybe if necessary, you can think about, you know, being prescriptive. Again, you know, it's the point I've always said, you know, as human beings, we shouldn't always wait for laws to do the right thing. And then that's why I like, you know, Isha's company's approach that, you know, we embrace this as early and as a cultural shift, right? We all know what is the right thing to do. And that's the problem, because if as human beings, you know, we struggle with compliance, etc., then it means you need a policeman to supervise, right? You need a policeman to say, report this so that I can check you are not greenwashing, etc. So it's about getting that balance right, Andre. So let me end there, Andre. Thank you.
Alana, thank you very much. And absolutely, it's a very complicated question because obviously financial regulator is and financial institutions are at the heart of the economy. So it's it's them who are financing the mining houses as well as the lots of other companies, and to see how financial institutions can play their role. It's not as easy and straightforward question. Yeah, absolutely. At this stage, unfortunately, I need to close this discussion because we're running out of time. I want to thank you, all participants. I want to thank you from my side before passing it to Professor Whelan. I want to thank you for participation. It was very interesting, insightful exchange of opinions earlier today. And a few takes on my side, which is regulator is very committed, which is great to see in any transition, including just transition, as it's complex. And it's work in progress, and we do well on the governance side in South Africa, which is known for a number of years. From economic perspective, our sovereign may be impacted by ESG, and leadership is taking it seriously. Internationally, non-financial data is being taken very seriously by asset managers, and I'm sure across the continent as well. And lastly, corporates listed or unlisted, to remain competitive, are ensuring investing in the right people with the right skills sets to drive ESG transition. And it's great to see all together. Professor Whelan, I pass it to you for the last closing remarks. We have 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope I have my camera fixed now. Is it working, Andre?
Not
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear very well. Please continue.
The camera's on, but you can't see it. Okay, I apologize.
No problem.
So anyway, terrific to hear from everyone. It's been a real pleasure and very inspirational. A couple of closing thoughts, and again, my commendation on all your great work. I think one of the things that we've heard is how we need to focus on the cost of inaction, right? Very often people say, well, it's going to cost me too much to invest in this. I don't really understand it, but not actually evaluating the cost to the region, to the individuals who live there, of not investing in a better environment, in better social conditions, right? I think what we also heard was that we shouldn't be managing to data. Data is an outcome. We need to understand what are the material issues that we need to manage for that are critical to our financial institution or to our business, and then determine from there our reporting metrics, which are very important to disclose and manage, right? But when you see it as Isha, I think, mentioned, a sort of tick the box reporting exercise, that is problematic, and that it won't drive positive societal impact, and it won't drive better financial performance. I think we've also heard that ensuring that we do have that good reporting data is imperative, both for decision making by corporates, by investors, and by regulators. And terrific to have everybody on this call, and Andre and his team working on that. So I think, overall, finally, I would say, we have such major challenges confronting us across the globe, not least in Africa. Working together in what I've heard people call sort of uncommon collaborations, bringing together community organizations, nonprofit organizations, employees, asset managers, suppliers, supply chains, data managers, et cetera, to solve for these challenges together, to figure out collaborative approaches, I think is really the way forward. It takes a village, right? So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Andre, for putting this together. And again, a pleasure to meet all of you. And my apologies that my camera is only working for me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Whelan. And thank you very much to all participants. Unfortunately, we don't have any question. They didn't have any time for the questions, which we received. Apologize for that. But I promise we answered all of them as they came. As they came, they're still coming. Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much for all participants and speakers. Thank you. It was really a pleasure. Thank you, Professor Whelan.